Today I'll be discussing the 5 global trends driving changes in learning and development. In order to have this discussion, we need to talk about macro trends. And macro trends is a pervasive and persistent shift in the direction of some phenomenon on a global level. And these 5 global trends will discuss the functional integration, the amalgamation of processes, formation, platforms, people skills and politics, network-centric development, operational excellence, and shrinking time horizon. Functional integration is key because it is about integration of learning and development and organizational development, talent management, and succession planning functions and abilities. Historically, all of these things used to be independent, but now the trend is that the integration is how things work together as a whole, as opposed to it being part and isolated. And so there is part of the process is an ongoing business planning and continuous improvement process. And these instances of people development and integration and learning are no longer isolated processes, but a part of the training and the leadership and succession planning created within a company for how people understand each other within an organization and how to really understand the performance issues associated with an organization in terms of the leadership team with the trajectory of an organization, and how to really truly facilitate constructive conversations that would bring about the change necessary to see the outcomes needed for leadership dialogue, needed for the processes and the frames, the tools needed to guide people through to engage the teams to make new platforms for management, learning teams, and understanding the implications that these types of changes have to employees and habits and to people, and for people to learn, unlearn, relearn all these processes as part of a structural change process and part of a structural process. And so this is what functional integration is all about, really putting all the parts together in terms of learning and development within an organization so that changes can occur. Particularly, let's look at functional integration on the scale of education and international education. And so we begin to discuss the discussion centered around social integration. And so there was a study done that talked about children who were part of like a formal education system in Syria, who were living in Turkey. And so you kind of wanted to, sociologists wanted to understand the dimensions of the social interactions and the social regards and the two-dimensional social conditions in accordance with spirituality, etc., of the 4 million Syrians living in Turkey, for example, And so there was a study that was conducted by some researchers, Dr. Byron Zuban, who went ahead and talked about what social functional integration would look like in terms of social integration. And so in sociology, there's a terminology that's about integration, and it's used to accommodate the unity between political and culturally the chaotic environment emerging from World War II. And so social integration then sort of realized through the construction of social groups, the different types of structures that are in place within a society and the social cultural features of a new society. And so a cultural integration for a group of people that have to exhibit types of basic behaviors of creating a old culture, bringing in the old culture and sort of like moving towards this new culture, this new common synthesis of living in a new culture and creating a new group. And of course there will be some social problems. There'll be basic social issues in accordance with politics and religion, the economy, education, morality, the law, family dynamics, health issues, integration within communities, and the social sense of being, encountered and compared to other communities. And so social integration, particularly in education, we talk about the basic institutions of the social structures of education. Now, in fact, education is very dominant within many cultures and societies, and particularly from the study we talked about in Turkey, there are different types of positive and negative shaping structures within the social institution of education. And so we're looking at the phenomenon in itself, like what's causing this like social problem. And so when we start talking about social integration and how people function and behave, we're really looking at the habits, the formality, the informality of the educational process. And so in the future, we will continue to see that, these types of topics, basic functions of education, which deals with socialization, transferring the cultural heritage, the politics, the processes, the functions within an institution, the economical functions within a society will become extremely important. And so we need to have trainings and leadership fully aware of this part of what's happening when we start talking about socialization and a global environment and a global process. Another trend is the amalgamation of processes, platforms, people skills, and the politics, and what sort of like influences the learning and development, which is a researcher discovered the term amalgamation of processes, platforms, people skills, and politics. The 4 Ps: processes, platforms, people skills, and politics. Now, when thinking about each idea separately, it's it doesn't correlate, but in terms of looking at it and learning in the whole process, point A to point B, you sort of think about it in steps and series and components to performing the skills needed for a job. And so this all relates back. These 4 Ps sort of like predict the odds of success within communication. And so in education and in international education, we're looking at opportunities to monitor these types of systems and this process. And so in the future, you would see not only within education, but in other sectors, this opportunity to sort of put into context the skills that's required and applied within people in terms of their trainings and how they use these tools and skills to their knowledge towards specific circumstances. And so this all comes into context with integrating the 4 Ps into a sort of like a vertical learning system. And in this vertical learning, by the 4 Ps in learning and development teams, there's a design, and you design your own outcome. The third global trend relates to the impact of ubiquitous network-centric world in which we operate today. So there are many devices and different information that connect people and experiences. And historically, people development was a very person-centric opportunity. And so now in a network-centric development is more of using the environment of things that's just meant for one individual, but for others to see and learn what that person is interested in too. So opening up the platform to more things and allowing more people to be a part of this network-centric development opportunity. And so as we go into this global world, we are looking at just multiplying the effects of how learning occurs and how learning transpires for professionals to harness this network power and be able to use these structural developments and experiences to leverage the effect that they have within their networks. And so there are dimensions to what's happening for this to take place within an appropriate space and time, in such as in the physical classrooms, for instance. And today, in the present, there's also the virtual classroom. So there's the virtual classrooms, there's a physical classroom, being in a physical place, and also there's the other dimensions of using this organized aspect to this organic, traditional face-to-face opportunity and experience that people usually experience. And so there is challenges and problems that occur with how learning can happen, but people originally joined these forces to sort of solve the problems around learning. And so we're going into this network-centric type of development where the dynamics of the master network, the capabilities of everyone working together and using their experiences alike to bring together this new platform of learning and development and organization and connecting. And so that's what the network-centric development is all about as a future trend that will continue to grow in international education. The fourth global trend influencing education and international education comes with operational excellence, which influences the learning and development of operational excellence and the ability to understand how to train for outcomes to impact businesses and the performances that the company will endure. So there are many training functions that's driving out cost within organizations and within education. And so improving efficiencies and scalability and accountability, then you sort of bring about a more effective, measurable type of education, as well as consolidating the environment and creating transparencies within education so that the efficiency and the effectiveness will become apparent. And so holding teachers accountable, holding principals accountable, holding school staff accountable for operational excellence is part of a credible metric system that can be used to ensure that management allows for the appropriate questions to be asked, the appropriate ways of bringing fruition to the trainings of how it's going to work, and really to kind of look at cost and consumption needed to support the growth and development within this training aspect, but also to measure the progress of what matters within an organization, especially what matters in teaching and learning and education. And so really understanding how money is coming in, how money is going out, and really just understanding the impact of these things and having something measurable is a future trend in global education, looking at operational excellence in learning and development, and learning and looking at how it's integrated within the company to have success, and really truly looking at the leaders and how they redirect the training as part of an investment tool for bringing about appropriate employee segment of people that can work together and really drive the business to efficiency. The fifth and final global trend that will be working more towards the future is the shrinking time horizon. And today the market sort of forces the acceleration and pace of change, which the planning horizon and the time it takes to execute are shrinking learning professionals need to continuously monitor the skills and knowledge gaps to assist leaders in how they define the new requirements related to recalibrate the development of leadership capabilities on a continuous basis. And so looking at how this time gap, we're dealing with this time gap of cost and consumption, allows for improvement. And not only that, but to also to work with this challenge, because the rapidity of development, the processes that are happening is a challenge. It is a challenge. So when it comes to metrics, leaders have to be able to manage a few things. How effective is the training? How learners can perform? And what impact does this training have on the outcome of an individual? And so really looking through the learning and development of professionals is not enough for it to just be a sophisticated way of creating and interpreting. It involves a sophisticated deploy of measurements, meaningful measurements, to really understand how learning and development is contributing to the business outcomes. And so time, the paradox of time and the shrinking of time is something that will in the future work with quality and consistencies in how countries operate. And so creating great partnerships and creating great opportunities and workflow and continuous improvements, and really allowing people to fall into a mantra of learning and development functions will propel and push the shrinking time gap into something more focused for operational excellence and business success in international education and in education around the world.